Welcome everyone to our very first webinar where we're going to talk about strategies to profitably increasing fresh vegetable, berry, and fruit production in the warm and hot climates, with a focus on the cost-effective solutions to meeting the challenges and exploiting the opportunities created by COVID-19. So welcome, namaste, salam alaikum, chin chow, Sat Sri Akal. I must say I'm absolutely floored by the response to the webinar. When I was talking with our business development team globally, we thought it would be a good idea to share some of the strategies and learnings we've developed over the last 35 years. And so when we put the webinar together, we thought, oh, maybe we'll get 100 people. That'd be great. 667 people have registered from over 31 countries. And if you look at this list, it's pretty amazing. There's probably countries on there that I have not mentioned because I scanned quickly through the registrations, but yeah, that was quite impressive to see the extent of the list. A little bit about myself. So my name is Richard Voliberg. I'm the president and CEO of Cravo, and I've worked there for 36 years. I have a degree in economics and led the development of the retractable roof houses and coverings. I've also developed the computer control strategy for automating the retractable roof houses in order to try to figure out how to create the right climate. But in order to do that, I really had to understand plants. So I've studied for many years plant physiology to understand how plants respond to the different environments. To further my understanding and Cravo as a global company, we have 2 research and demonstration centers in Mexico. And so I lead I decide what we're going to do, how we're going to do it in conjunction with our team. And about 10 years ago, I decided to take Cravo global. So we've been in business for 43 years now and focus primarily on North America. And I decided to take it global, and because there seemed to be interest. And I've had the benefit of visiting most installations globally. So I've got a good understanding on how different crops, different growers are using these types of houses. And to complement everything, I've developed many financial models for comparing different production systems. So I like to look at how do we link climate, market, plant physiology, and finance. Some housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded, so you will be able to download it for viewing later. If you have questions, you will be able to type questions, and we will try to answer as many of them as we can at the end. And we will be doing 3 simple questions as polls in order to provide feedback, but also to give us some indication on what is of greatest interest to you to learn more about. The outline. What's the situation we're dealing with? What are the potential responses by the consumer, the retailer, the grower, banks, and the government to COVID-19? We'll do a quick summary of the challenges faced by growers in hot climates. We're going to examine some choices for how to respond. We'll do a quick review of conventional production systems, open field, protected, and then look at combining the benefits of open field and protected. And then look at how yields and timing can be manipulated by combining the advantages of both. Then we'll talk about how to decide what your best response could be, looking at strategies for determining which production system best suits your crop climate, market, and budget, and then some tools to evaluate the potential profitability and return on investment. So looking first at the consumer, because we have to stay focused on who's actually really buying our product. So after COVID-19, there could be an increased focus on being healthy. So the consumer could be looking at purchasing healthier foods like fresh fruits, berries, and vegetables. They could be willing to pay more for specialty crops during the off-season. And they want to feel safe and secure, so they will tend to buy premium quality fresh fruits and vegetables that they believe are safe. So this could lead to an increase in branded products that are certified to follow food safety guidelines. Could lead to an increase in prepackaged fruits that have not been touched by many hands, and that they may shop at larger retailers or online. Now let's look at what retailers want. They want to supply premium quality produce year-round for their affluent customers. So there is a segment of the market that has the cash, and they're going to be looking to buy what they want to feel healthier. But the retailers also wants a good supply of consistent quality that's at an affordable price for their mainstream customers. So there's really two segments. Retailers want compliance with food safety standards, and they really prefer few suppliers who can meet their needs year-round. Now, looking at the producer, they obviously want a good return on investment. They want to have the ability to increase their profitability both by increasing revenues and reducing the operating costs. They want to be able to target the off-season or shoulder market to increase their revenue and improve the value that they bring to their produce distributor or retailer. And this is really critical because when you have a peak season, everyone's trying to move the product to the retailer. The retailer has the choice of who he wants to buy from, and the prices are low. The moment you can be earlier or later with your product, you bring greater value to the retailer, which means you're now more important to the retailer. The producer really would like to grow year-round, or at least have an extended season to be able to maintain a constant revenue and a more stable workforce. And they want a business that's relatively easy to manage day to day, and it can be scaled to meet increasing demand. And they want to minimize their dependency on labor, since labor is getting more expensive and travel restrictions are reducing availability. And this travel restriction is becoming a very new situation. Growers in the UK have been worried about it for years since Brexit, but now with the COVID, the movement of labor is going to become more challenging. And I think with the unpredictability of COVID-19 in terms of its spread, that means the growers are going to have greater difficulty in being certain that they got access to the labor that they need. So labor efficiency is going to become key. And obviously, every grower would like to reduce their dependency on chemicals. Now let's talk about the banks for a minute. The banks want to ensure that you have a secure revenue stream, because repaying the bank is dependent on you having a successful harvest. The bank wants to see that there's a clear strategy for long-term success. How are you going to position yourselves to be different from the mainstream? They want to ensure that the business has control over its most significant costs. So if electricity is a big component of your production cost, growers do not have control over electricity. So it may be subsidized right now, but in the future it might not be. which all of a sudden puts the business at risk. The banks want to ensure that the business is flexible to react to changes. So this could either be a change in the marketplace where the product you are growing is no longer profitable, or a new crop has all of a sudden become more profitable. So here in Canada, where I'm calling you from, the cannabis industry exploded a couple years ago, and vegetable greenhouses were converted to cannabis. And now the industry overbuilt, and now there's cannabis greenhouses switching to tomatoes. And so a bank wants to see that there's the ability to react. And they also want to know that the asset and the business that they finance has a good resale value. So what's the potential exit strategy? So how you build your business will impact on its value, both if you choose to sell it, and when the bank's looking to finance it, they want to make sure that they also can sell it. So what do the governments want right now? Well, there's a lot of talk about increasing food security. They would love to see produce being produced closer to the consumer to reduce road miles. In places like India, where transportation is more challenging, anytime you can produce closer to the larger cities, you're taking pressure off the roads. Obviously, right now, food security is becoming a major issue, particularly, for example, in the Middle East. Increased food safety. Governments want to minimize the use of scarce resources like water and electricity. So in the Middle East, of course, water is a limiting factor. In South Africa, they don't have the most dependable electrical grid, and it takes a long time and a lot of money for governments to solve that problem. So anytime you can reduce the use of the scarce resources, the government looks favorably at that. And of course, now they're looking at trying to minimize the movement of labor, particularly across borders. And every government would like to provide more employment for their own people. So the key to long-term financial success will be to figure out how to design your business so that it meets as many of these stakeholder wants as possible. So it's not so much focusing on your business, it's focusing on the environment in which you are operating. So my focus today is going to be on the hot climates. So that could be right from Northern Australia all the way to Northern India, through the Middle East, North Africa, all the way down to South Africa, South Florida, Mexico, Central America, and Northern South America. There are many choices for how producers try to meet the needs of their customers. Most growers in warm and hot climates produce seasonally during the winter in the open field. So during the months of December, January, February, it's easy to grow in the Middle East, for example. It's very difficult to grow in places like Russia or Canada in the winter. So when we look at open field, which I would call nature without protection, there's a big list of advantages and disadvantages. And most of you looking at the registrations appear to be very experienced in agriculture. So I'm not going to go through this in detail, but I'd like you just to take 1 minute and just read through this list to familiarize yourself with some of these points, because we'll be referring to those later on. So when you think of the open field, I really think of it as growing when nature makes it easy. And in the open field, you have a low cost of production. It's easy to grow. There's lots of experience, but you have no control over the weather. So your yield is vulnerable, and you're pretty much guaranteed to be selling when the prices are low. Because as soon as the weather becomes adverse from winter turning to spring, the radiation's going higher, the air temperatures are going higher, and the plant's now suffering from heat stress, and so the yield and quality goes down, which is right when the prices start to go up. Other challenge open field growers face besides the weather include electricity, so it may be undependable or expensive, depending on where you are. You might have a constraint of poor soil quality. The big one is water. So in the Middle East, it's available, but it's expensive, except for in places where it's subsidized. Or you have problems with water quality, so you need to use desalinization or reverse osmosis. Experience. In most warm and hot countries, growers only have experience in the open field. They have limited experience growing in some sort of protected environment. Financing is limited in many cases. Size, too small of an operation to be economically successful. This is a big problem in India, for example, where there's many small or marginal farmers, and they're each growing on a ½ acre, 1 acre, 1.5 acres, or 0.5 hectares. And that's really too small of an operation to be economically viable. And people try to find ways of making it work. But when you do the numbers and look at it financially, you cannot be profitable on a 1 acre operation. And if you try to make an investment on that land, you're going to be in financial trouble. An import duty. Some countries charge high import duties on equipment designed to improve food production, and this is a major issue in countries like India, for example, where the growers are looking for technology to improve food production, but their cost of importation is high, adding to the total capital investment and cash outlay. So now we're going to talk a little bit about protected cultivation. And growers in warm and hot climates are utilizing many different types of production systems with some form of crop protection covering. So we're going to do a quick overview of the advantages and disadvantages of the various production systems using covers. The first one is net houses. You see these used a lot in Sinaloa, Mexico, in the Middle East, in places where there's not a lot of rain. And net houses have a huge set of advantages and disadvantages. And again, I'll just give you a minute to read through the list. So when I think of net houses and I look at where they're installed, net houses are great for extending the season past what the open field can do, because they will protect the crops from the direct sunlight and keep the insects away. So if your normal open field harvest will be stopping in late February, for example, with a net house, you can extend the season into end of April, maybe early May. And you'll get an increased yield in terms of the number of fruit, but your pack out will go up. But the major problem with the net houses is the moment you get rain, the rain comes in, And now you've got problems with humidity, foliar disease, and the plants start growing more vegetatively. And if you do happen to have frost, you could lose your crop. And so in certain locations, I've seen people having to install plastic in the winter, then take it down in the late winter, and then they're installing shade cloth in the spring to try to extend the season as long as they can. And for places that are more coastal, net houses are quite vulnerable to wind damage, which can result in a total crop failure. So other growers have experimented with tunnels. And tunnels were originally developed in the UK for the strawberry industry, where it's more dark and cold and they need to make it warmer. So again, I'll give you a minute just to read over the advantages and disadvantages. So looking at tunnels, they are effective they're a low-cost way of getting rain protection and some cold protection. But their biggest limiting factor is that they have difficulty in high radiation, high heat locations. And so they're not really good for extending the season if you're in a sunny, warm climate, but they are helpful if you happen to have a couple months of cold. And again, the houses in the plastic can be quite vulnerable to damage from wind, which again makes your revenue vulnerable. So the next one is a naturally ventilated greenhouse. And in some countries, they refer to them as gutter-connected greenhouses. In other places, they refer to them as multi-span. But the key is that you're creating openings in the roof to allow for air exchange. And again, there's a set of advantages and disadvantages. So with a naturally ventilated greenhouse, they're effective for helping the production in the wintertime if you're in a high radiation zone. But again, their limiting factor is they're very difficult to cool in a hot, sunny climate. And so when people try a naturally ventilated greenhouse, they find they quickly have to add shading systems, misting systems, or things like that to further try to cool the greenhouse. And so a naturally ventilated greenhouse is really designed to make it warmer. But if you're already in a warm climate, you're making warm conditions now hot, and hot conditions really hot. So to try to cool, growers are using pad and fan cooled greenhouses. Fans on one end, cooling pads on the other. And again, they come with their own set of advantages and disadvantages. So one of the biggest challenges with pad and fan greenhouses is that they use a lot of water and a lot of electricity for cooling. And so when you're in a hot climate, a pad and fan greenhouse will have the clear roof make it warmer, and now you're using more water and more electricity to cool. And one of the big problems is you're limited to 50 meters approximately from fan to cooling pad, which means you have to build many blocks of small houses. So what are the key learnings about the conventional production systems? Each has many advantages and disadvantages. It's impossible to prevent all the problems. There's many causes of reduction in revenues and many causes of increases in operating costs. The management of the business becomes more difficult as it expands because all the disadvantages equal problems. And so the more disadvantages you have, if you have a small operation, you have many problems that are small, but if you have a big operation, you have many problems that just became big. And no one system is optimal 12 months a year. So open field is great in the winter. Net houses may be great in the spring, but don't work in the summer. Naturally ventilated don't work in the summer. Pad and fan doesn't work in high humidity. So each of them have a set of challenges. So how would our businesses be impacted if we could unlock the benefits of the open field and protected environments? The words we use impact on how we think. What words come to mind when I say the word greenhouse? Here's a list of the words that come to mind when I think of greenhouse. What words come to mind when I say automatic retractable field or orchard covering system? Do the same words still apply to automatic field and orchard covering system? So I'm going to give you an overview of what automatic field and orchard covering systems are, so that we can then understand how to apply them as we develop our strategies for our businesses. So here you're looking at a retractable flat roof house, and one motor can close and open 9,000 square meters in only 6 minutes. And when you see the tractor there, do you think of a greenhouse or do you think of a field? And we'll provide protection against frost, wind, hail, excessive dry conditions, and the impact of rain, but we cannot keep the plants dry. So when you look at the scale of some of these places, you don't think of the word greenhouse, you think of a field with a covering system. And these types of roofs only use 1 to 3 kilowatt hours of electricity per day per hectare, in comparison to almost 1,000 under pad and fan. And here you can see 17 hectares under one roof, and it's ideal for crops like blueberries. You could grow premium or off-season tree fruits like pomegranate, avocado, cherry, mango, papaya. Or use it for season extension of field vegetables. And you will reduce your water usage 50 to 75% per harvested kilo compared to the open field. And if insect pressure is high, install insect net below the retractable cooling roof. And now you're combining the advantage of a net house with the climate optimization and protection of a retractable roof. But when crops must be protected from the rain, a peak roof is required. So the rain will drain into a gutter, so the area is kept dry. And one motor can open almost half a hectare or over 1 acre in around 2 minutes. So here you can see a large installation of a peaked roof X-frame house over strawberries. And one of the big advantages is that you can grow on land that is not flat. So in many countries, excavation is expensive or difficult. And so here you can cover rolling grades without having to move land, which also preserves the soil quality, because anytime you excavate, you disturb the soil. You can also install insect net under a peaked retractable roof. So again, you're combining the advantages of a net house with rain protection and climate optimization. And if you're in a hot, dry location, a low pressure misting system or fog will really help through the hot, dry times. And that misting system will operate just a couple hours a day. Now, wind speed or wind direction is not a limiting factor with retractable roofs. And in over 35 years, we've never had a roof blow off. So this allows you to think about locations where you may be susceptible to a typhoon, cyclone, or hurricane. Now, retractable roof houses offer a unique benefit in hot climates. It can use a white cooling roof instead of a clear roof. So on the left, you see the greenhouse roof. On the right, you see the cooling roof. And when temperatures are optimal, the plants are receiving direct sunlight. So that would be in the morning, in the summer, or in the middle of the day in the winter. But as soon as the plants become too hot, an automatic white cloud closes and blocks the sun. And a peaked roof house is more efficient at cooling and ventilation than a flat roof. So if summer cooling is critical, the peaked roof is better. Now here you can see two roofs closing in opposite directions. The top roof is a clear greenhouse roof. The bottom one is a white cooling curtain. And if you close them both all the way, of course, now you have an energy curtain inside for additional heat retention. And when you close this roof, partway like this, if you stop everything right there, you've got the most efficient ventilation with no direct sunlight, no excessive shading, and lots of air exchange. And for specialty applications, people are using 3 layers: a clear roof, a white cooling roof, and retractable insect net. And to maximize the life of the roof covering, it's recommended to use the internal curtain systems for light and temperature control. And for crops that are day length sensitive, you can add a blackout system underneath. So now let's compare what words we used with the word greenhouse to the key concepts about automatic retractable field and orchard covering systems. So on the left are the words that we used to associate with greenhouse, and on the right are the ones that would be connected to the concept of an automatic retractable covering system. So the key difference is The field covering system starts with the concept of a field and then figures out what levels of protection are required. And it tends to be more large scale, and it would be at a lower cost than some of the other high-tech greenhouses. When we use a white roof covering, we refer to it as a cooling house. So a greenhouse to us is something that has a clear roof to build up temperatures when it's cold outside, but a cooling roof is designed to cool the plants when the roof is closed. So how do we use this tool to maximize our profitability? Besides protecting the plants from extreme weather, we also want to optimize the growing environment. But what does that mean? So I'm going to show you the impact of insect net and a retractable cooling roof on leaf and soil temperatures. And this video was taken at our demonstration and training center in Culiacan, Mexico in February. So it's not even hot yet. We're at latitude 24 north, 10 kilometers from the Pacific Ocean, which means the latitude is similar to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, Indore, India, Muketsi, South Africa, Miami, Florida, and Bundaberg, Australia. And that was really why we selected Culiacan, because the latitude is the most popular latitude worldwide for growing vegetables in the winter. And all those regions would love to extend their season from the winter to the summer.
It is February the 20th, and we're in Culiacan, Mexico, and we are in a retractable flat roof house. And what we're going to do is check the impact of the insect net on the sidewalls on the soil temperature and compare that to the soil temperature under the retractable roof and in direct sunlight. So it is now 12:30 in the afternoon, and when we look at the soil temperature here under the insect net, we can see that it's 56 or 57 degrees under the insect net. When we go under the direct sunlight here, we can see that the soil temperature is now hitting 60, 61 degrees. And now we're going to go under the retractable white plastic roof. And we can see that the soil temperature is 41 degrees. So when you look at the difference between insect net, when we were reaching temperatures of 57, the soil temperature was very similar under the insect net in comparison to the direct sunlight. But we were approximately 13 to 14 degrees cooler under the white plastic. And if we look at the leaf temperature, we can see that the leaf temperature is 29 to 30 degrees Celsius under the retractable roof. And when we go into the direct sunlight, we can see that the leaf temperature is approximately 34 degrees, which is going to cause the transpiration rate to rise dramatically, causing these plants to go under a water stress condition much earlier than these under the white plastic roof.
So my question to you is, which temperature do you measure when you manage your plants? Are you measuring air temperature, leaf temperature, or soil temperature? So here's a summary of the temperatures we just saw in the video. So the direct sun was 60 degrees Celsius, the cooling roof was 41. The leaf temperature went from 34 down to 30. So what do you think the air temperature was when I took this video? I'm not sure, as I didn't measure it, because I believe that it's more important to manage the plant than the air, and that the leaf and soil temperature will tell me much more about the plant than the air temperature will. And a very favorite example I use is if you weren't feeling well and you went to the doctor and you said, hey, I'm not feeling well, can you check me out? And if he came to you and he measured the air temperature and he says, hey, it's 23 Celsius, you should be feeling fine. Well, the air temperature has no bearing on how your body is feeling. And we could see that the root temperature and the leaf temperature is significantly different from the air temperature, and yet that's what everybody measures. So the plant is what we're managing, not the climate. So what guides us the most effectively is to look closely at how the plant is developing. So looking at the climate is interesting, and a lot of people will say, well, what's the temperature inside of a cooling house? I go, well, what's more important, what the air temperature is or how the plant is performing? So I'm going to show you a comparison that we did back in 2008. So that's 12 years ago, just after we constructed our demonstration house in Mexico. And we took a tray of young plants, Don Rule 2180 from DeRuyter, and we planted on the same day in the open field, in a net house, and in a retractable roof. And I think the planting date was January 20th, if I recall correctly. This is all on the same farm, same water quality. Obviously, irrigation was different in the field than the net house and the retractable roof. And when you put the plants side by side, you can see there's a dramatic difference. So the tomato plant on the right came from the open field. The one in the net house is in the middle, and the one on the left is the retractable roof. And that basically was the starting point of our understanding that we're not managing the climate, we're managing the plant. And so the plant on the right had excessive transpiration, causing excessive water stress, causing it to develop a dwarf structure. The plant in the middle of the net house never had direct sunlight, didn't have wind, was exposed to a higher humidity. And so it developed a low level of water stress, which caused the plant to put more energy into leaves and not into fruit. And the plant on the left was exposed to direct sunlight at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then protected by the white cooling roof from say 10 o'clock until 4 o'clock. And so it had the combination of an open field and a protected environment. We weren't trying to manage the air temperature. We were trying to manage the plant. And so by looking at the plant structure, you can start to understand how the plant is responding to the environment you're in. And to me, that is the most important way of judging how you are doing in terms of managing the plant. So I don't care what your target air temperature or humidity is. I care, how does the plant look and how should it look? So now let's look at the impact of having insect net below the cooling roof. And so again, this is at the Cravo demonstration house, and it was on June the 1st, 2015. So this was the year that we built our new facility there.
It is 1 o'clock in the afternoon on June the 6th, 2015, and we are in the Cravo demonstration greenhouse in Culiacan. And we're just going to look at the temperature and humidity differences between the retractable roof without the insect net and the retractable roof with the insect net. So currently, the outdoor black plate temperature is 39 degrees. We have 5 degrees 5 km/h winds. And when we look at the temperature and humidity, right here is the side without the insect net, and we can see the air temperature is 36 degrees and the relative humidity is 49%. And over here is where we have the insect net, and the air temperature is only 1 degree higher, but the relative humidity went from 49 to 70%. So what we're learning from this is during the high heat and humidity conditions, the insect net is helping to trap more of the humidity, and the plants are definitely performing better right now under the insect net because of the fact that the air temperature is similar, but the higher relative humidity is lowering the transpiration rate. Over here, without the insect net, we're running into a much lower humidity, and so to compensate, it would be ideal to add a misting system so that we can boost the humidity and help lower the air temperatures.
So the year we did this trial, so that was June the 1st. And on May the 5th, we had an independent testing agency in Mexico do a comparison of the Estefania yellow capsicum from Syngenta, where we compared the capsicum from this cooling house with insect net to just a conventional insect net at the top grower in Culiacan, which was located only 2 kilometers away from our demonstration site. So we had the same climate outside. Both had insect net, but this one had the cooling roof. And the cell wall thickness, or the thickness of the fruit, was 13 to 21% heavier in retractable, which means there was more kilos of fruit per box, which makes transportation more efficient if you're shipping long distances. The fruit was 40% firmer, which is equal to shelf life. And the fruit in the net house dehydrated 30 to 35% more after 15 days of post-harvest storage. And so not only is there a difference in the quantity of fruit, but changing the environment changed the quality of the fruit. So the improved quality was due to the roof being used to preventing dew accumulation at night. So the cooling roof was closed to stop any moisture from settling in the house, because this was 10 kilometers from the ocean. In the net house, the crops were wet in the morning, which created a more humid environment, leading to a more vegetative response. The roof was closed in the cooling roof between 11 and 4 to block the UV and infrared, which was now reducing the transpiration rate, reducing the fruit temperature. And we were now optimizing the transpiration rate of the plant by increasing the humidity level inside as the inside air temperature increased. So as we went from 30 to 35 to 38 degrees, we would continue to increase the humidity levels in order to reduce the transpiration rate. So key learnings so far. Air temperature does not equal plant temperature. So this green pepper was grown outside in Culiacan, Mexico. You can see the fruit temperature was 39 degrees and the air temperature was 28.9. So for those that are growing capsicums outside, you probably have 30% sunburn, and that's due to the sun causing the fruit temperature to increase. And the second one is managing humidity does not equal managing transpiration. So again, are we managing the climate or are we managing the plant? So let's talk a little bit about the plant management strategy. If the plant temperature is too cold, we want to increase it by closing a roof. If it's too hot, we want to reduce it by closing the roof. If the plants are not losing enough water, we want to make them lose more water by retracting the roof. And if the plants are losing too much water, we want to reduce the amount they are losing by closing the roof. So if you think about it very simply, if the temperatures are between, say, 17 Celsius and 28 outside, you have perfect conditions outside. And so the plants are grown in the natural outdoors to realize the benefits of outdoors. And the strategy is only to close the roof if the plant temperature is too cold, if the plant temperature is too hot, if the plant's losing too much water. And for the rest, we would close it if it's raining, if there's hail, and if there's too much wind. The ability to optimize the plant temperatures and transpiration impacts on what crop we can grow, which market are we chasing, domestic or export? The choice of varieties. Our yield, the fruit size, the firmness, the bricks, the percent number one quality, our target harvest window. Are we trying to go early, late, or off season? Our planting strategy, one long cycle or several short cycles. Our transplant date, our plant density, our choice of hydroponics or soil, which together determines our overall profitability and return on investment. So the strategies to long-term financial success is to invest appropriately to ensure a reasonable ROI can be achieved. So you have different options. You have to figure out what is the appropriate investment. To ensure you get the highest prices, are you going for premium quality or off-season? We need more number one quality and we need bigger fruit. To ensure that our yearly operating costs are minimized, we don't want to use a lot of electricity, we don't want a lot of water for cooling, and we want to reduce the amount of labor required to operate the houses. To make the business easy to manage, we want quick reaction to changes in the weather or market conditions. To increase the focus on strategies to prevent problems rather than treat the symptoms. I like to refer to this as fire prevention rather than firefighting. We want easy automation because we don't want the management to become excessively complicated as the business grows. To maximize the long-term viability of the business, we have to minimize the risk of a major crop loss due to frost, wind, hail, dust, or excessive heat. Minimize the risk of damage to hail or winds. Be adaptable to grow different kind of crops and build the business so that it can be acquired. And the more of these strategies we can implement in our plan, the greater the probability of financial success. So now I'm going to look at some rough numbers on investments. And we're going to use this as some, when we start to get to the financial models. So what's interesting is, first of all, we have people who are going to talk in acres. Some people refer to hectares. If you come more from the greenhouse world, you think of price per square meter. If you come from the field or orchard world, you think more in terms of hectares, not square meters. So a range of investment for the materials depends on whether we're looking at a flat roof or an X-frame. So these first set of materials is CIF your port. And you can see how the pricing changes based on, as the area gets bigger, the price changes. And the price range is large because of the options. So do you want bird net under the retractable roof? Do you want insect net under the retractable roof? Do you want retractable insect net? Do you want rain protection or not? So all these factors will influence on which model you're looking at. So people will frequently ask me, you know, how do you look at return on investment? So I'm going to show you the example that I use when I'm trying to evaluate a new crop in a new country where I don't have a lot of experience. And so for this particular example, this gives us a range, a target cost, including installation. So you can see that on a per square meter, you're going to be somewhere between $23 and $32 a square meter. And of course, keep in mind, because we have over 600 listeners right now, we've got people from developing countries and advanced countries. So the price for installation will vary significantly depending on which country you're from. And so for those that come more from the open field or orchard, they're thinking in terms of investment per hectare, not per square meter. So here's a quick way that I would evaluate the potential ROI. So let's assume that our investment per square meter is $270,000 per hectare. And our target payback is 5 years. So if I take 270 divided by 5, that gives me $54,000. So that means I need to generate an incremental gross profit per hectare of $54,000 to achieve a 5-year ROI. If your current profit per hectare is $50,000, then that must come from a combination of increases in revenue and reduced operating costs. So how we achieve the higher profitability depends on what you grow. So are you growing tree fruits, berries, vegetables, or lettuce? So for strawberries, we would be deciding whether we want to target before or after the open field, decide if it's preferable to grow in the ground or in gutters, and accessibility to labor, clean fruit are some of the factors. Decide how important it is to keep the rain off the plants, since that decision will impact on the capital investment. So in certain countries like Egypt, rain is a problem, but not a huge problem. It may not be worth investing in rain protection, but if you are in the UK, for example, rain protection is a must. Decide on planting density, choose the right variety, and the major limiting factor on strawberries is your nighttime temperature. So we can regulate daytime temperature by using a roof and a misting system. But if your nighttime temperature is 30 degrees, unless you have a way of reducing it, that will become the limiting factor on how the strawberries will perform. So you would use a greenhouse roof to target fall production. Sorry, you'd use a cooling roof to target fall production. So here on the right, you can see a white cooling roof, and on the left, they have a clear greenhouse roof. So they're growing strawberries in raised beds here, and here we have it in raised gutters. And so in places like the US, for example, or Australia, the highest prices are in the fall because it's the hardest to grow. So California is dropping off production in the fall, and Mexico hasn't ramped up yet. And Florida is limited on when it can transplant because the temperatures in June, July, August are very high. The soil temperatures will be extremely high in the open field. So they have to delay when they transplant until temperatures go down, which means their first harvest is coming in close to Christmas. By using a cooling roof, they could now transplant weeks earlier to target the fall. This particular operation on the top right is in Australia, and they actually were transplanting in the late winter, grew the plants through the hot summer, kept them in good condition through the hot summer so that they had a strong yield coming into the fall, which is when their prices are the best. For blueberries, it's difficult to advance the harvest. It's easier to extend it. What we do there is we would benchmark the current production system. So if you're growing in tunnels, for example, what's your plant density? What's your yield per plant per year? What's your capital investment per hectare? Your fixed production cost per hectare, and your variable production cost for picking, packing, and transport. So then we would create the retractable roof production system. And we would say, well, based on our understanding of how the plant development changed, we could potentially change our plant density. We can look at yield per plant. What's the capital investment? What's our fixed production cost per hectare? We would look at what's the average selling price and then determine the premium for increased size or delayed harvest. So to give an example on the change in development in a blueberry plant, so this was a trial done in Mexico. The crop in the left, and this is the variety Biloxi, crop on the left was grown in a retractable roof using organic fertilizer. The one in the middle was under a tunnel with organic fertilizer, and the one on the right was retractable with conventional fertilizer. And you can see there's a completely different structure to the plant here. The tunnel, we've got lots of vegetation at the bottom, but not a lot of strong shoot development. So the tunnel environment was causing a vegetative response in the plant. So they needed the tunnel for rain protection or frost protection, but the response of the plant to the tunnel was to grow vegetatively. And you can see the picture of the retractable in the tunnel, sorry, the retractable with organic and the tunnel with organic. There's a complete different appearance. And the one on the right is comparing the difference between retractable with conventional fertilizer and retractable with organic fertilizer. So we have two variables going on. What is the growing environment and what is the fertilizer? So these factors can allow you to look at almost a doubling of the yield per square meter because you're getting larger fruit size, you're getting larger, more fruit. So better plant balance, larger fruit size, and it's easier to extend the production into the heat because you have the ability to cool properly. When we look at high-value tree fruits, we have to decide, are we covering an existing orchard or covering a new one? Determine whether you will achieve a better price if you harvest earlier or later. We would then benchmark what is the best, average, and worst yields over the last several years. So you already know what you're achieving. So that's the starting point. Determine the best, average, and worst pack out. So what you harvest and what you ship, the difference is how many number one quality is it? If you're covering a new orchard, we would look at what variety, which rootstock, what planting density, and what pruning system. And that would be done in conjunction with the genetic suppliers and the growing consultants who understand how the plants are responding in that particular growing environment. And then create a potential model. This year down in Australia, in a trial between HailNet and the automatic covering system, there was a 140% increase in yield under the retractable. And of course, in a crop like a mango, cherry, you get one harvest a year. So it better be a good one. And one of the most amazing parts is they really increase fruit size. So the cherries on the right, they actually look like mini apples. And that's essentially due to climate optimization. Strategy for vine crops. Decide if you're targeting the premium quality or the good quality market. Decide if you want to optimize field growing or to go higher tech with hydroponics. Target the harvest window, the target harvest period will determine whether it's better to grow one long cycle or two short cycles, or in the case of cucumbers, 3 cycles. It's always difficult to plant earlier in the summer due to the pollination challenges. It's easier to do a planting in the winter to have a strong summer plant going into the summer. So if I'm trying to target, let's say in the Middle East, I have a choice of either extending the September planting into June, or to also do a planting in January to try to get a really strong plant going into the summer. The insect pressure will be very helpful in climates with high pressure and low humidity. Cucumbers have proven to be especially interesting in retractable organic cucumbers, particularly because when you have the ability to keep insects away with the insect net, then regulate the transpiration rate by controlling sun and humidity, it helps reduce the chance of red spider. And if you can keep the rain off the plants, then you can avoid the challenges with foliar disease. Lettuce in the desert and the tropics. So picture on the left is from Australia, where they're growing, they had 50 degrees Celsius through the summer. And the picture on the right is from Miami. So that's in the tropics. And so they're growing lettuce using a floating raft system. So depending on where you are, your target market, the picture on the left here just has a simple cooling roof. The one on the right has a retractable greenhouse roof, a retractable cooling curtain, and retractable insect net. So they're really, really able to regulate the climate in order to manage the crop quality. So how can you predict whether your plan has a chance of succeeding? Benchmark your plan against conventional production systems. The type of return on investment model that you will use will depend on whether the crop harvests once, like a cherry or pomegranate. And that basically says it's a seasonally sensitive crop. So you need a winter chill cycle, then a spring flowering, and then a harvest. Or you have an extended harvest like a blueberry strawberry, where the crops are day length sensitive. Or you could have multiple planting cycles like a tomato or cucumber, which is not really season or day length sensitive. So before we get to the financial models, we'll take a very quick poll with some sample questions. And if you could just take a minute to fill this out, this would give us some good feedback on what your primary interest is as we look at what type of webinars to do in the future. Okay, we'll go 10 more seconds. Great, thank you. Okay. So now we'll go to the next question. This is a little broader question because it's focusing on a wider set of applications. Okay, another 5 seconds. Okay, great. Share the results. And the final question is, we still have to go through the ROI, but I would like some feedback on just your evaluation so far, how we've done on this. Okay, another 5 seconds. Great. That's amazing. This has been a lot of work to pull together, and so I appreciate the feedback on that. Great. Thank you very much. Okay. So because many of you know us already, before we get to the financial models, just if you do want more information, there's just some email addresses for the panelists that are joining us on this webinar. So if you want to jot those down, you can feel free to reach out to them directly. And to get more targeted information to your interest, we have lots of information on our website, and I'm just going to show you. And the problem with websites, you never know what's in there till you get in there. And so we spent about an hour and 15 minutes going through the details, and I'm going to show you how do we summarize what we do in 2 minutes.
Today, more people around the world than ever before are integrating fruits and vegetables into their diets. And as a result, retailers want to have stock available all year round. But there are several big challenges that growers like you are facing to meet this increasing demand. Extreme and inconsistent weather patterns result in inconsistent supply. Input costs are frequently rising faster than selling prices. And insects cause massive damage to crops at the same time as consumers demand that their food is produced with minimal chemicals. So for you, the challenge is how to have predictable and consistent supply when the weather is inconsistent. For over 35 years, we've been working on the solution. Introducing the Retractable Roof Production System, which creates a more consistent growing environment for farmers in warm and hot climates. When the weather is ideal, the roof will automatically retract, allowing the natural outdoors to come inside. When cold, rain, or hail comes, the roof will automatically close to protect the plants. And when there is high summer heat, the roof closes 80% to protect the plants from direct sun, while also allowing for ventilation and cooling. The system is very efficient, as it requires only 1 to 2 kilowatt hours of electricity per day, per hectare, and requires minimal water for cooling when temperatures exceed 35 degrees Celsius. Cravo houses have proven to resist damage from hail and major storms, such as hurricanes and cyclones. By working with Cravo, you can create optimum growing conditions year-round to produce crops with larger size, with higher yields, longer shelf life, extend your harvest season, or target a completely different harvest season. Together as partners, we will create an innovative production system to meet your market opportunities and climate challenges, while targeting a 3 to 5 year return on investment. Join us as we continue to build production systems of the future that combine nature and protection to create superior growing environments.
Okay, now for those of you that really want to understand more about the production system itself, if you go here to the
Over
science...
the last 35 years, Cravo retractable roof houses have been installed on 6 continents.
Okay, if you go back here to the science behind the retractable roof production system, you will find a series of 6 videos that I created that basically go through in detail the overview of the production system, looking at plant temperature, focusing on water loss or transpiration, looking at water stress, the difference between a cooling house and a conventional greenhouse, and automating the retractable roof and walls. It takes approximately 1 hour to watch all 6 videos, and I think you'll find it gives you a really good background. It goes, much deeper than what we can do in a webinar here. So now what we'll do, we're going to go to a sample return on investment model. So we're going to start off very simply. As I mentioned earlier, we have models for tree fruits and then crops like blueberries and then vegetable crops. So we try to do one of these for every application to understand the financial viability of a future production system. And so what we like to do is benchmark what's currently happening. So if you were growing, for example, papaya, cherries, mango, whatever, what are you currently doing in your open field in terms of tons per hectare, your best year, your average year, your worst year, what's your percent pack out, and what's your actual pack out best and worst. Then using what we've learned over the years, we would forecast what is potential in terms of yield and pack out. What's the percent increase in expected volume? We would look at what's your cost of production per hectare and what's your variable cost of picking. And because in the tree fruit industry, the focus is either on size or timing. So your revenue per hectare is going to be controlled by the price based on size. So for example, this was an example of cherries. And as the size increased, the price increased. And we would look at what was the actual percent of harvest by size, and then what would be the forecast harvest by size. And so in this particular example, the average revenue went up 18% simply by looking at the change in the fruit size. Then in the tree food industry, timing is actually one of the biggest factors. So if you harvested 1 week earlier, 2 weeks earlier, 3 weeks earlier, or you delayed it, what is the premium that you would get from harvesting earlier or later? And so the average price was $18.20, but I can simply just say, okay, well, we're going to target going 2 weeks earlier. And now it changed my average selling price to $20. We would then look at what is the investment in the current production system. If we used a flat roof, if we used a peaked roof. So what is the price for the materials? What's the extra for installation to give us an installed cost? And after that, we would look at what is the gross revenue and profit per kilo in the open field, in the flat roof, in a peaked roof, to understand our profit per kilo. What's the percent increase in profit per hectare? The percent increase in both in dollars and in percent. And this one's really interesting because it says we could reduce our orchard size by 50% if we had a higher yield, because in open field, you're growing extensively because your yield is lower, your pack out's lower, so you need to grow on more hectares. But if you change to a high density planting system, and then you manage the climate, you can achieve a higher yield off a smaller footprint. And so by going through this example, it's going to tell us what is the payback in years from the first harvest. So if I'm investing 30,000 a hectare in a hail net and 350,000 in a flat roof, my increased profit from better sizes and earlier still gave me a 1.6 year return on investment measured from my first harvest. So if it took 2 years to get your first harvest, you would add 2 years to the 1.6, and so you'd be at a 3.5 year return on investment. Excuse me. So that gives you an example of how we do the analysis on a tree crop. If we now go to the blueberry, so what we do there is we will benchmark what's currently happening in the tunnel. So we're growing in a tunnel that's 8 meters wide. We have 3 rows per tunnel. The pots are spaced 60 centimeters apart, which gives me a plant density of 6,250. What is my target yield in my first year, second year, third year in a tunnel? And then we would do the same thing in a retractable roof. And we'd say, okay, instead of a tunnel 8 meters wide, we have a house that's 9.6. Because the plant structure in the Cravo roof is more compact, we can actually increase the density. So we're going to put 4.5 rows in per house. That means one house has 4 rows, the next house has 5 rows, and then 4 rows, and then 5. And we can go 50 or 60 centimeter spacing, which means I potentially could have a 50% increase in plant density simply because I had a better environment and the plant was growing a more compact structure. Then we would look at what is the yield increase from growing in a better climate. So what's my yield increase in year 1 versus a tunnel versus retractable? What's the target in year 2 and year 3?
Excuse me, I'm seeing the sweet cherry.
Oh.
sheet.
Oh, sorry. Then I'm going to have to reshare. Sorry. Thanks for letting me know. Okay. Thanks, Ben. Okay, so going back here, we've got 8 meters in the tunnel, 3 rows, 60 centimeter spacing gives us 6,250 plants in the tunnel. 9.6 in the retractable, 4.5 rows per house, 50 centimeter spacings. So I can do 50 or 60 centimeters and it'll change my plant density. And then we look at what's your current yield in the tunnel. So if you're in a place like Mexico where they have more experience, or you're in a place like India where they're still learning, so what's your starting point? And then what's the expected yield? So I can make whatever assumptions I want here on the yield. And that would be in conversations with the grower. So the combination of plant density and yield meant that we could increase potentially the yield of the blueberry per square meter by 163%. We would then analyze what is the cost per plant, what is the cost for the pot, what is the cost for the substrate, because if I'm spending $9.50 per plant, and I have 6,000 plants per hectare or 9,000 plants per hectare, that's going to change my investment for plants, pot, and substrate. So then I look at what is the material cost of the house. So if I'm growing under a tunnel, I've got a price for the materials, a price for installation, which is the total cost. And then I've got 150,000, for example, on the flat roof, 30,000 for installation for a total cost. I have to look at my hydroponic system, my ground cover to understand my total capex. And this is where it gets really interesting, because an initial approach or initial look would say, well, if I'm used to spending $47,000 for the tunnel, and a flat roof is 200,000, that's a lot of extra money. How am I ever going to pay for that? And my total capex, though, by the time I take my plants plus my structure, I'm at 106 versus 294. So you can see that's almost triple the investment. And now I have to look at what's my yield per hectare. So here I went from 10,000 to 26,000 per hectare. And I can look at what is my average price that I get and what's my premium for either size, quality, timing. And so this is where your market analysis comes in. Who are you selling to? What timing? What's someone willing to pay you for it? Which is now going to tell me what's my total revenue per hectare. So it went from 70,000 to 200,000 per hectare. My cost of production was 41. We assumed it went to 52 here because I'm using more fertilizer. I have a higher plant density, so my plant management cost is higher. And now I have a gross profit before my harvest cost. I'm spending $1.50 for every kilo I harvest to pick it, pack it, and transport it. So whether I grow it in a tunnel or in a retractable roof, that $1.50 is a fixed cost per kilo. So when I multiply my total yield by my $1.50, my variable cost went from $15,000 to $40,000. My net profit per hectare went from $14,000 to $112,000. My net profit percentage went from 20 to 56. My production cost per kilo went from $4.10 down to $1.90. So my investment here is my total if I take my total investment divided by my gross profit is going to give me a payback number. So we talked about constraints earlier. So you may have a constraint where you have a total target number of kilos, or you've got a budget, or you've got land available. So this will then help you understand what is the different constraint you're faced with. So if I need X number of kilos, how many hectares do I need, and what's my total capital investment? What is the total budget I have? So if I only have $1 million, I can do 9 hectares of tunnels or 3 hectares of retractable roof. And if I only have 10 hectares of land available, what is the kilos produced per year out of that 10 hectares? So again, this is helping you to do some sensitivity analysis to make some assumptions and forecast what would the financial model look like if this happened or if that happened. And you want to benchmark it to what is currently being done in the region you're in. So now we're going to go to the new share. So here's the vegetable one, gets to be a little more detailed because you got many ways you can grow colored peppers, for example. So this is an example from North India. And you can grow colored peppers. Well, you don't grow them in an open field, but you can grow peppers in an open field. You can grow them in a net house or a tunnel, a poly house, a pad and fan cooled house, a retractable flat roof house, a retractable retractable X-frame with soil, or a retractable X-frame using hydroponics. So you actually have 7 different ways you could grow a capsicum. And if you want to be successful long-term, you want to make sure you're the low-cost producer with the highest quality out of all 7 production systems. Because if you have a financial model that shows you will be the low-cost producer, you will be successful in the long term. And so what we do is we start off with a market analysis. And we say, okay, what is the market price per month? 50 rupees up to 80 rupees, 80, 80, 80, down to 70, 70, 70. What is the percent of harvest coming from each month? So in the open field, 20, 50, 30. If we go to tunnels, if we go to a greenhouse, a flat roof, an X-frame. So we would try to understand what is our harvest curve, because 1 kilo harvested here at 50 rupees has a different value than the colored capsicum harvest here at 80 rupees. So this is the this is the price curve of colored peppers in India. So obviously you want to be targeting the highest price window. Now when we look over here, this is the production curve. So this is the percent of production that's coming in a certain month. So if I'm in the open field or a net house, I've got a really high peak over several months, which basically says I'm supplying at the same time as everybody else. If my retailer wants me to be in the business longer, I need to figure out how to stretch this curve, because I don't want to be just supplying the retailer for 3 months, because then I'm not special to him. I want to be special to the retailer because I need him during this time and he needs me during this time. So by building your business model, understanding the need of the retailer and the market price, you can develop a strategy of how to manage your operating costs and maximize your revenue. And so this is an example that goes into pretty great detail, looking at all the different expenses you could be incurring, the revenues, the investments, the cash flow, the payback in years, the profit per kilo. So because we have people from over 30 countries on this webinar, this is just to give you an example of how we have 3 different financial models to target a tree fruit, a crop like a blueberry, strawberry that gives us an extended season but is day length dependent, or a vegetable crop. And so I see we have 20 minutes left in the webinar. So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions and ask the panelists to unmute. And so the panelists that we have on here, we have Rajendra Kumar from India. We have Yosun Cengiz from Turkey, Bede Miller from Australia, Robert Rauhoff from Holland, Ben Martin from Canada, and Carlos Ruiz from Mexico. So I'm just looking at the questions here now. What is the longevity of such systems compared to Polytype systems? So, we're going to answer that live. So there's basically 2 things. There's the structure, or what we call the hardware, and then there's the covering. So there are retractable roof houses that are 30 years old that are still in operation. So because it's all steel, aluminum, and stainless steel, you can be looking at 30+ years. Roof covering average life is 8 to 12 years. Next question. How does the capex cost of these systems compare with pad and fan over a large area? Okay, I've already addressed the average capex for different size houses. The critical difference here on a pad and fan cooled house is you're typically limited to 1 acre, 1.5 acre sizes per house because of the distance limitation between the cooling pads and the fans. And so it's hard to get economies of scale on a pad and fan. So whether you build 1 acre or 20 acres, it's essentially the same cost per square meter. And so in a retractable roof, because there is no cooling or ventilation limitation, when I'm putting 5 or 10 or 17 hectares under a retractable roof, my cost per square meter will drop. Next question. How this system can be effective in Kenyan climatic conditions. So I guess I'm not totally familiar with Kenya, but if we go back to what are the climatic limitations that are the most difficult to manage? So I would say the most difficult thing to manage is high nighttime temperatures, because there's really no cooling system that's super effective during the night. Even pad and fan, humidity levels increase at night. And so a cooling pad system doesn't work well with high humidity. And so as your humidity level rises, you're basically just bringing more humidity into the house and not really cooling it. High elevation is your biggest benefit. So if you can find a sunny, hot place in the daytime that has a high elevation, so you have cool nighttime, that is magic. So for example, in Mexico, we have our one demonstration house in Culiacan is at latitude 24 at sea level. Our other demonstration center is similar latitude, but I think it's 1,100 or 1,300 meter elevation. And we're growing the same strawberries, blackberries, raspberries, blueberries, same varieties, oh, and figs, same varieties at high elevation and low elevation to understand the climatic limitations. So a retractable roof gives you a lot of control and flexibility, but it's not perfect. It cannot do everything. It can't do everything. And so high nighttime temperatures is the #1 limiting factor. So I think Kenya's relatively high elevation. I think it would work extremely well. Let's see. The next one, what type of Cravo A-frame would you recommend for Joburg, South Africa, where the temperatures in the winter months fall below 0, -3 Celsius? Yeah, that's a great question and very easy to answer. In the video that I showed of the triple layer retractable roof, that actually is in Brits, South Africa, just an hour outside of Joburg. And so they have a clear roof for the winter protection and rain protection. They've got a cooling curtain for the hot summer. Oh, and of course, hail protection as well is a big thing in Joburg. And then they added the insect net because they're doing some sensitive crops. I think it was cucumber and watermelon. Next question. What kind of structure can Cravo install for ornamental seedlings, forest ceilings, and ornamental container plants? So depending on where you're located.
Richard, sorry to interrupt. There is actually a request coming that the spreadsheet should be closed and the picture should be broadened.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
No problem.
Sorry for interruption. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. So now I've got to get back to the questions. Okay, next one. What kind of structure can Cravo install for ornamental seedlings, forest seedlings, and ornamental container plants? Depends whether you're doing propagation or production. So if you're doing propagation, a peaked roof house will be preferred because rain protection is a major benefit when you're doing small young plants. But rain protection is not really required as you're getting into the larger sizes. So typically in ornamental plants, your challenge is the basics of too hot, too cold, too windy, and hail, or the impact of a hard rain. So for those types of crops, I think a peaked roof is great for the propagation, but for production, just a large scale economical flat roof house is all you require. Next question. With retractable cooling houses, how is virus, fungal, and disease managed? So first one is, there's three, I think it's three basic principles. First one is grow a strong plant. And so if you can grow the plant outside, get direct sunlight, UV, infrared, wind on that plant, you're naturally going to develop a leaf structure that has a thicker wax cuticle, which is your primary defense mechanism against insects. So foliar, fungal, and bacterial is really grow a strong plant and keep the moisture off. So moisture comes in two forms. You get dew at night and rain. So closing a roof 95% at night seems to be the best solution to preventing dew from forming on the plant at night. So if I close the roof at 3 o'clock at night or 10 o'clock at night, and I close at 95%, I will stop the dew from forming on the plant. Then I retract the roof at sunrise or whenever the temperature gets warm enough. And now I have dry leaves in the sun. And if you have dry leaves with a thick cuticle, then you really can't have foliar disease. And virus is, there's two things affecting virus. The first one is the plant stressed? And the second one is how high is the pest population? You'll notice in the open field that the pressure of insects and virus gets higher when the heat comes. And when the heat comes, the plants transpire more, they suffer more water stress, and all of a sudden the leaves start to flag. And when the insects see flagging leaves, that basically is a signal to the insect that that plant is an excellent host for babies to eat. And so if you can close the roof when it's really getting hot, reduce the transpiration rate, keep the plant full of water, the insects do not see plants that are good hosts for their babies. And so we have seen significant reduction in insect reproduction by managing plant health. But for certain crops and locations, so in certain countries of the world, virus is a big problem on tomato. And so adding the insect net underneath the cooling roof helps a lot. In certain countries, I think it is Australia, they don't have the same viruses. And so, you know, the tomatoes are growing without insect net there. How difficult to manage different crops under one roof? That is a fantastic question. So I look at this in a very simple way. If it's too cold, all crops will react to too cold. So if you had -2, every crop will suffer or die. So roofs would be closed. If I had 10 degrees, some crops would really stop growing and some wouldn't. So too cold is quite easy because you're just going to say, at what threshold do I close the roof to keep plants warm? And typically it'd be, say, somewhere between 10 and 15 degrees. As soon as the temperature went above 15 degrees, then the roof would be retracted. All the plants are outside, just like your garden or just like your field. So you could have, you know, tomatoes over here, capsicums over here, cucumbers over there, all in the field. The problem is when it becomes too hot. And so let's use the example of tomato, pepper, cucumber. The most sensitive crop is cucumber. So I would need to close the roof to protect from excessive plant temperatures and transpiration sooner on the cucumber. Then it would be the capsicum, and then it would be the tomato. So it's not difficult to manage, but what you would want to do is make sure that you have similar crops under similar motorized roof zones. So when you go back to the principle of a field, if you had a 5-hectare field and it was a third, tomato, pepper, cucumber, I would want to make sure that the motors that are controlling the roof are grouped so that all the motors are closing the roof at the same time over the cucumbers versus the tomatoes versus the peppers. And you would also obviously want to make sure that the irrigation is zoned the same way. So as long as you have similar crops under a similar roof zone, it's easy. In our demo house, we've done tomatoes and peppers under the same roof, and that's fine. It's optimal to have them under separate motors, but it works. Cucumbers, you must have on a separate motor zone because they need protection much faster and much harder than the capsicum or the tomato. The rule of thumb that I use is I look at the size of the leaf. The bigger the leaf, the more surface area to lose water, the faster it needs protection. Next one. For the Middle East, will the triple screen help the tomato get through the adverse summer with temperatures of 45 to 50 under shade and high humidity? So I'm going to go back to my earlier comment about nighttime temperatures. So the daytime you can typically regulate quite well when you have the combination of the greenhouse roof, the cooling curtain, and the insect net. And if you have, and if you're under high humidity, then that means that you would be shading less because you're trying to make the plant lose more water in a high humidity location. So if I think of the tropics versus the desert, in the desert I have low humidity with excessive transpiration, so I need to reduce it. If I'm in the tropics with a high humidity, I actually need more direct sunlight to increase the leaf temperature so that the plant transpires more. And so whether you're in the tropics or the desert, there's this optimal range of transpiration. And I'm either trying to increase it or I'm trying to decrease it. I just, as long as I know what my biggest problem is, I can come up with a strategy to deal with that. Next one, which are and how defined are the desired set point leaf temperatures? Okay, so leaf temperature is a indicator of potential transpiration. So if I have air temperatures of 28 degrees and the leaf temperature is 31, we know that the leaf is transpiring in direct sunlight to cool itself. But if I'm 3 degrees warmer than outside, I know my transpiration rate's really, really high. And so what we do is we first look at the plant overall. Am I happy with the plant structure? And if you think back to the tomato crop that had the 3 tomatoes side by side, the open field, the net house, and the retractable, by looking at those plants, I can say the open field transpired too much, the middle plant didn't transpire enough, and the one in the retractable roof had the optimal transpiration. So I'm trying to make sure that I'm not transpiring too much. And what we see is, let's say on a blueberry crop, I think it's the 31 degrees is our target maximum leaf temperature. Because above 31 degrees, our transpiration rate's too high. And I've seen, and if you go onto the Cravo website and go under the crop section, and then go under blueberries, there is a video that shows blueberries in a tunnel. And there is about a 1 meter, 1.5 meter opening in the plastic for the tunnel to ventilate. And you'll see on that video that the yield of the blueberries is approximately 50% less underneath the opening than it is in the middle of the house where it's completely covered with plastic. And so by looking at the change in the plant structure, we can say it's transpiring too much. We need to reduce the leaf temperature in order to reduce the transpiration in order to make the plant balance more optimal. So we kind of work backwards. We start with, let's look at the plant. Let's think about whether it's transpiring too much or not enough. And then let's regulate the maximum leaf temperature. And then we would go back to the computer and change the settings so that the roof is closing appropriately. And when you go onto the website and you go back to the retractable roof production system control strategy, you'll see that we use a black plate sensor, which is essentially just a piece of black steel up on the weather station that is getting hot as it gets sunny. And it is an indicator of what the leaf temperature is going to be. And so the roof is controlled by a black plate, which is forecasting leaf temperature. Next question. For a greenfield blueberries 1 hectare installation, what would be the fruiting time? You would have yield in the first year. So you obviously have to transplant at the right time, but you should be able to at least get a kilo, kilo and a half in the first year. Is there a difference between the 3 examples of blueberries related to shelf life? We've looked at that, and when you're in your peak production time, we don't see a significant difference in shelf life. But as the summer season starts to arrive, and again, it all depends what we're comparing to. So if I'm comparing an open field blueberry or a tunnel blueberry, they have both different limiting factors going into the heat. And so we have seen that we're able to regulate the transpiration and fruit temperature as the summer heat comes, so that we can extend the quality longer into the season. But in terms of in the middle of the season, we have not really seen a significant difference on the blueberry side. Next question. What's the average height of the roof in the retractable system? So just like if you go look at a greenhouse operation that's been around for 30 years, you'll notice that the oldest greenhouse may be 3 meters tall, 10 feet, and then they went to 12 feet or 14 feet. And people are starting to understand the importance of having a taller house. And we kind of followed that. So people that bought the original retractable roof started at 12 feet or 3.65 meter. And then we went to 14 feet or 4.3 meters. And now we're doing 5 meters on the peaked roof houses. And in the flat roof, we're now doing as high as 6 meters. And that's basically, the hotter you are, then the taller you want to go, especially when you're using a cooling roof, because you want to get that heat far, far away. So the projects that we've done in the Middle East, for example, they're 6 meter to the cooling roof and 5 meters to the insect net. Can we use retractable roof in the desert? Absolutely. There was an earlier question from a gentleman who wondered about the impact of dust. And there are flat roof houses in Arizona for over 25 years. And Arizona is a dry area. They also get those many, some people call them dust devils or cyclones, but the swirly wind. And there's never been an issue with roofs or dust or drive systems and dust in a desert climate. So from a structural mechanical point of view, there is no negative impacts from dust. As far as from a functional point of view, desert areas rock with a retractable cooling roof. And if you take a cooling roof and you put bird net underneath, you basically can manage everything you need to in a desert climate for many crops. And if you put insect net underneath, then you can do your veggie crops. Next question, is it possible to retrofit a retractable roof over an existing poly house structure in India? No. Unfortunately, they have to be designed as a unit. So just like a poly house is not a glass house, and a glass house is not a retractable, they're designed completely different. So that's not possible. Next one. Have you done a trial with blueberries in hot climates? Yes. How hot is the climate? The highest average temperature or humidity? So the trials, the production we're doing is latitude 24, which is Culiacan, Riyadh. And they have, kind of like India, they have a summer season and a monsoon season. So the temperatures can get over 40 degrees with humidity levels in the 10 to 20. if you're in that May, June timeframe. And then when August rolls around and the rain season starts, then the temperature will drop, but the humidity will spike, and then they can get, 60, 70, 80% humidity. Next one, what's the minimal area for a retractable roof greenhouse? This goes back to economics. So we've got structures that are 12 meters by 60 meters. Are they economical? Not really, but they're specialty for specialty applications. So if you're doing research or seed production, young plant propagation. So the minimal area goes right back to the economics. So the smaller the area, the higher the cost, not just of the house, but if you're buying a computer, if you're buying an irrigation system, your management. I think the question should be really, what is the minimum area to be profitable? Let's turn the question around. So it's not how small can the house be, it's how large does it need to be in order to be economically viable? And those financial models will work through that quite nicely. Next one. There were some questions about structures in India. So right now there's 2 major projects under construction near Hyderabad. One is about 8 hectares and the other one's 5. And they are targeting high value vegetable lettuce production. And they're using combinations of cooling roofs and insect net, or greenhouse roofs with cooling curtains, or greenhouse roofs with cooling curtains and insect net. And so India is a market that has a lot of potential and challenges at the same time. Price per kilo is obviously one of the major constraints. It's a big market. There is a segment of the population that has the money and the desire to buy high quality, but the distribution channels are more challenging. Next question is, how close are the numbers on the examples to reality? Well, these are all based on working with growers over the years. So because we're a global company, we stay very close to the users of the technology to understand, are they using it correctly or not? What strategies can they employ to get better results? So the panelists that are joining me, all the business development team, they're all agricultural engineers. They're not mechanical engineers. So our focus is actually plant physiology and how to manipulate the plant physiology through climate optimization so that the target return on investment can be achieved. Next one, do we change the soil as standard operating procedures in retractable systems? I assume that you're referring to problems of nematodes and EC as far as changing the soil. So EC can be managed, well, let's go back. In a conventional polyhouse, the problem is you're keeping the rain away. So you're injecting fertilizer into the soil, the plant's absorbing the water, and the salts are remaining. So over time, you have a problem of increasing EC. And so then you have to look at how do you solve that problem. And in the polyhouse, it's difficult because the poly is keeping the rain away. And in the retractable roof, you could choose to retract the roof to let the rain come in. So for example, at our demonstration center in Mexico, we've been growing on that soil for 12 years now, but it's already been farmed on for, I think, 20 years previous to that. So there's about 30 years of production on that same soil. And when we started out, we were growing kind of season extension. So we would transplant in September, run until April, May, June. We go longer as we got more, as we learn more. And then the roof would be retracted through the summer, which is when the heavy rains came, in order to clean the soil and get rid of the salts. And then as we started to do trials on how to extend the season through the rain period, then we were closing the roof during the rain and we were keeping the rain away, and then we ran into problems with salt buildup. So, that can be a problem over time. Nematodes is a bigger challenge. And if you, like in any production system, if you're harvesting continuously in the same area, you could run into a nematode problem. And at that point, it may be advantageous to look at a hydroponic system using substrate. Next question, do you manufacture all the systems out of Canada, or do you partner with regional manufacturers? We do manufacture in Canada. We source certain components globally. So our responsibility is to supply the highest quality at the lowest cost. But the first focus is quality. So we're not looking at trying to do things cheaper if it means not better. So people that are using retractable roofs, they're covering large areas and they want the security on what they're buying. So we want control over what we make. And we've done lots of analysis on what to buy where. And it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you're always shipping far away. And so in our situation, at least we know what's going on every job site and have control over what leaves the factory. And the way the systems have been designed, freight does not represent a large component of cost. It costs me more to ship a truck from Toronto to California than it does to ship a container to Australia or India. So freight is not an issue. Next one. For UAE conditions with summer temperatures can reach 48 degrees with cooling system, how many degrees can be gained to cool down the plant? Well, are we talking air temperature or plant temperature? And are we talking daytime or nighttime? Because the limiting factor is not 43 degrees in the daytime. You can manage that with a cooling roof and a misting system. And UAE, of course, has locations that have higher humidity and locations that have lower humidity. And so, but the number one limitation for UAE is nighttime temperature. And that's the most difficult one to contend with. If there was an economical way of using air conditioning during the night, that would be fantastic, because at night the sun's not shining, so you're not generating heat. You just have to take away the heat in order to cool down the plant. Next one, are there walls on the retractable? Yes, there is. They can either be stationary, insect net, stationary cooling curtain, or motorized roll-up curtain with insect net. So it depends on how much climate optimization you want and what the plants need. Comment, the management explained for viruses and bacterials is not convincing. These diseases are complex, and in many cases, the severity increases with moderate temperatures. This would be my reply. It's easy to observe what's happening. It's difficult to explain why. So when we started our trials in Mexico back in 2008, we had a grower who was growing tomatoes without insect net, and he had a couple years experience, and Carlos and I went there one day and the plants were covered in whitefly. And there was no virus, and yet the tomatoes outside were covered in whitefly and had virus. And so to go from inside the house to outside the house, 20 meters, and you had whitefly in both locations, and you had virus outside but not inside. And I go, you can't argue that. We observed it, but we can now try to figure out why that happened. And so we have seen through the 12 years of experiments we've been doing in Mexico that we have seen a change in the number of eggs on the underside of the leaves. So we saw insects under the leaves, lots of them. So we knew they were there, and we knew the vector was there because the tomatoes outside had virus. But we didn't see eggs. So that meant the reproduction behavior of the insect changed. And so there's a gentleman by the name of Dr. Jorge Berney who did his PhD thesis on trying to understand the change in the plant morphology between a net house and a retractable roof, because we observed these changes in the insect population and behavior, and the question is why. And if you go on the Cravo website, there is a link to that thesis. So he did his doctoral thesis on understanding the change in the plant morphology from growing in a retractable roof. And so what we do know is we see less problems. I didn't say we have no problems. So we can say we've seen less problems. And so the question is, why are there less problems? And this has to do with, there is a linkage between plant health, plant stress, insect behavior, and the impact of that change in behavior. And so with a higher population, you have a greater vector and a greater chance of virus. And so my reasoning may be right or may be wrong. I don't know. What I do know is what we've observed over 12 years. And so I love to have these kind of discussions with people that are smarter than me on this kind of stuff, because just remember, my training is I'm an economist, but I'm really good at observing what's going on and trying to understand why. Okay, next one. Can the structure be used to grow blueberries at tropical climates, hot and humid summer and not so cold winter, Biloxi variety? Yes, I mean, that's what we're doing in Culiacan, Mexico, latitude 24. And you can get some more data on the climate there. Next question, what happens in the case of power failure? Okay, so a couple things there. The first one is because one motor can power either half a hectare or 1 hectare, there's not a lot of motors. And so prudent management would be to have backup power. And you don't need a lot of it. And you know, there's some discussions of people looking at solar power because they may want to build where there's no electricity. And because we're only using 1 to 3 kilowatt hours of electricity per day per hectare, you don't need a huge power supply, but you do need a good battery because you may need to operate the roof at night. So you either have backup power, or the motors have a manual override where you can take a drill, either a battery operated drill or a Honda generator with a electrical drill, stick it in the end of the motor, and you can then move the roof without being connected to the grid.
Richard, may I excuse the interruption?
Yeah.
We are 15 minutes over our allotted 2-hour period.
Yep.
Are attendees still able to participate here?
I think, yeah, they don't shut it off after 2 hours.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're actually on the last question.
Okay.
What is the maximum speed that can be tolerated by these structures? So all the models are designed for a minimum of 110 kilometer per hour with the roof closed. And obviously, if you retract the roof and roll up the walls, you can take virtually unlimited wind. The model A-frame is kind of the workhorse of the structures, which has been designed. We have designs up to 200 kilometer per hour winds with the roof closed, and these structures have proven themselves even through Hurricane Maria, which hit Puerto Rico a couple years ago. We have two different projects there. One had the roof closed during the hurricane, one had the roof retracted, and they both survived. So what we do is we tend to look at what is the maximum normal winds that you would get at your facility, and no matter what, they're always designed for a minimum 110. And if it's greater, you can have the control system automatically retract the roof.
Richard, there are two more questions still. They are very important. Yeah. Yeah, please answer those.
What information do you need from a buyer to arrive at a quote? Can you assist the buyer to design plan the eventual final size and install in a modular phase? Sorry. Yeah, that's a great question, Robert.
Yeah, yeah.
I recognize your name. I think you joined us on a on a tour to our demonstration house in Mexico.
Yeah.
So the information we would need is what crop you want to grow, your climate information, your target harvest time, because we have to figure out what problems we have to solve. And so by understanding the problems we need to solve, we can then determine the specs of the solution. We would then normally prefer to understand what's the master plan. So, you know, if everything goes well, what's your vision for the future? And then we design this as a master plan with a phased construction. So the houses can be designed to be expandable. So we would look at, okay, if you're doing a flat roof, for example, and you've got a 50 hectare field and you want to start with 2 hectares, how would we design it where you start with 2 and you can expand it over time? And the land grades are also very helpful. Plus, which way is north? Because we want to make sure that the shadows are moving.
Richard, can you mention about the Blue Book and the 10-step closure, how people can download from the website? And
yeah,
because it will be very helpful for the people who are looking for Cravo type structure.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to the, if you go onto the Cravo website, actually I will do that. Go here. So if we go back to the home page for a minute. Uh-oh, I'm not sure what that's happening here. I'm not going to go back there. Oh, here we go. Okay, so once we're on the home page here, the most important thing over here is the 10 steps. So if you click on here, we have some videos on more on the house design, but the big thing is we've developed a 10-step process for learning how to develop the right solution. And if you click on here, you can download the design book here. And over here, I actually wrote a book on the whole retractable roof production system that summarizes my journey and my learning over the last 35 years. And you can go there and download that as well. So those are two really good resources. Just one thing I wanted to hear. want to go back to the question that we had earlier. Here's the paper that was written by Dr. Jorge Berni. So if you click on that, you'll be able to see exactly the results of his PhD thesis, where he studied the change in the plant structure in the retractable roof. So with that, I think we've covered all the questions now. And so I'd like to say thank you to all of you for joining us on our very
Richard, can you say this thing that because recording of this presentation will be available to if anybody wants to watch, so they can
yeah, that's right. Everyone who's registered will receive an email with the recording.
Yeah.
So perfect. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. It's been a pleasure to have you join us in our very first webinar. Thank you again.
Namaskar. Namaste.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Richard, for your efforts.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Congrats, Richard.
Yeah.